So, in our skimming of the Goosebumps television show, we've seen how good direction can elevate the original book, we've seen how bad acting and scriptwriting can sink the original book, and we've seen the results of the show making an original sequel to one of the books. Now it's time to look at the Goosebumps television show at its most mediocre, with a script and direction that's just good enough to get the job done. C-grade children's horror television. But even here, in the middlest of the middle of the roads, there's some interesting things to explore if you dig deep enough. Originally airing together on June 29, 1997, the two-parter Welcome to Dead House is the 20th and 21st episode of Goosebumps' second season, the show's 39th and 40th episodes overall. Written by mainstays Dan Angel and Billy Brown, and directed by William Fruitt, this episode adapts the very first Goosebumps book of the same name, originally published 5 years prior. That makes this an interesting challenge by default, as R.L. Stine had not yet figured out the tone his book series would take. Welcome to Dead House, the book, is much more serious and way gorier than the series normally defaults to. So on top of the normal logistics in adapting the book to the small screen, like budget and special effects, the television show also had to consider how to readjust the tone of the work to something more in line with the series as a whole. A quick plot summary for the uninitiated: the Benson family have moved to their new home at Dark Falls, a strangely quiet, out-of-the-way little town with a large graveyard. After a number of strange occurrences, shadowy figures in the window, the dog keeps freaking out, things like that, the family starts to suspect that the house is haunted, but they're actually not thinking big enough. The whole town is haunted. A few years ago, there was an accident at the nearby chemical plant, and a yellow fog turned everybody here into the undead. They're closer to zombies than ghosts, and it's only a weakness to direct sunlight that allows the Benson family to escape. As you might suspect, the television version opts out of all the surprise face melting of the original book, as well as the large-scale finale taking place in a crumbling amphitheater. Instead, you have the undead swarming the Benson house and turning into mist as they're destroyed by sunlight. Speaking of sunlight, the book has it so that there's a network of large trees that keeps most of the city overcast, but compositing that would have been too much for the show, so you end up with a lot of undead characters walking around in areas bright enough to wipe out a vampire. An alternative weakness was called for, and the episode kinda gives us one. Mrs. Benson has this family heirloom, a wreath that appears to be made of actual garbage, but unbeknownst to all of them, it actually contains magical powers capable of warding off the undead, who can't claim the Benson family until it's gone. Much of the episode consists of the citizens of Dark Falls trying to trick the Bensons into destroying the wreath.
Well, it's just like in those scary movies, when the family brings something old into the house and then bad things start happening.
Well, it's probably just a coincidence, but all that strange stuff started happening just after we hung that thing up.
It did?
Yeah, it did.
If I were you, I'd get rid of it before something really bad happens.
And you know what? I think that's a solid adaptational choice, even if the prop is clearly something the production grabbed from a thrift store at the last minute. The undead themselves are somewhat simplified. Again, they couldn't get very gruesome with them, so they opted for a simple matte gray skin tone and a few bumps and imperfections here and there. It's very similar to the zombie makeup in Night of the Living Dead. In fact, the climax of the episode feels very much like a George Romero zombie movie, with the undead surrounding the house, banging on windows, the Bensons boarding the place up and making the higher ground. Yep, a lot of classic Romero flavor in this. Hey, did you know George Romero almost made a Welcome to Dead House movie? While it took until 2015 to get a Goosebumps movie in theaters, attempts were being made pretty much as soon as it was clear the books were going to be a huge success. At one point, Tim Burton was attached to direct a Goosebumps film, a choice that feels almost too obvious. but Burton was too busy at the time working on a Superman movie that also didn't get made. And then there was George A. Romero, the inventor of the modern zombie film, coming in with a script for a Welcome to Deadhouse adaptation. I don't know the exact timeline, but 20th Century Fox slated a potential release for Halloween of 1996, less than a year prior to Deadhouse's television adaptation. It's thanks to the horror archives of the University of Pittsburgh Library that we even know about this. According to what they have, Romero's version of Welcome to Deadhouse leaned hard into anti-capitalist messaging by reimagining Dark Falls into a fallen company town built around the chemical plant that eventually ghoulified everyone. There's also a central villain in this version, company head and town patriarch Foster DeVries, who comes to possess the town after his demise. DeVries still rules over the undead citizens as their boss by drawing people into the city, destroying them, and converting their souls into, well, ghost wages. The undead need souls to function, and DeVries has found a way to turn that into capitalism, baby. Ghost capitalism. Romero's works have often involved social commentary, especially his zombie films. 1968's Night of the Living Dead tapped into domestic racism, 1978's Dawn of the Dead was all about gross consumerism, and 1985's Day of the Dead took a shot at military collectivism. Romero didn't get a zombie movie out in the 90s. The nearest he got was co-writing, but not directing, the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead, which seems to exist mostly to give the character of Barbara a Sigourney Weaver-style action girl makeover. It's not awful, but it definitely doesn't hold a candle to the original, and it's thematically pretty bare. Based on the materials publicly available, had Romero made his Welcome to Deadhouse movie, I'd argue it would have fit in along very well with his Dead trilogy. The zombies are more fantasy-driven in this story, and it would have been a kid's film, probably, but zombies standing in for our post-Reagan economy would have been classic Romero. Obviously, this movie didn't happen, but I suspect some of the elements from Romero's version might have made their way into the TV adaptation of Welcome to Deadhouse. Again, the undead makeup and the swarming of the house feels like a direct reference to Romero's filmography, but there's also some light theming around jobs and economy. The episode opens with the Bensons driving by several shuttered buildings and businesses, suggesting Dark Falls is having a hard time economically. In the book, the Benson family moves to Dark Falls because they inherited this old house from a long-lost relative. Who wouldn't show up? Hey, free house! In the television version, however, the Benson family moves to Dark Falls purely as an opportunity for work.
This town's had a tough time. I didn't realize it at first, but most of the people around here are out of work. We're lucky we got this house so cheap. That means we can live for quite a while on the money we got from selling the old house. You know what that means for me, don't you?
It means you get to work on the book you're writing.
That's right. Just try to remember we're more fortunate than most. Will you do that for me, Amanda?
I'll try.
The TV version doesn't carry on the specific details of Romero's version. There's kind of a boss character, but he doesn't seem particularly more evil than the others. There's no soul wages. But I'd like to think the people behind the show recognize the thematic resonance of Romero's version and tried to work it in their own way. It's a pretty powerful idea, one you can see in other works as well. A small town ruined by supernatural forces as metaphor for capitalism? That's Night in the Woods' whole thing. In execution, the television version of Welcome to Deadhouse is kind of a dull affair. A bit too bright, a bit too underproduced, and all this theming I'm bringing up is pretty surface. They could have gone a lot farther with it if they were so inclined. Also, this is one of the random episodes where R.L. Stine shows up on screen, reminding us again that this man is not a performer.
Petey, for a dog, you're a great actor. You really scared me when you played dead. You're acting now, right? He's good. He's really good.
But even still, there's just enough spark there to really get the brain working, to imagine the could-have-beens and should-have-beens for this kind of work. It's creatively exciting, if not exactly exciting to watch. If you want to read more about Romero's version, there's a link in the description below. We're going to be covering one more Goosebumps TV story for this project, but it's a big one. A massive 3-parter that's not an adaptation of any of the books, but a huge original story straight from the TV writers. Could it possibly work? Only one way to find out.